What if one ancient book held the answer to a question that has haunted every civilization on Earth? Not a question about God, not a question about creation, but a question about a specific group of women whose names were erased from history, whose knowledge was buried, and whose influence still echoes in places you would never expect. First, Enoch chapter 6 verse 1 tells us something remarkable. It says that when the sons of men had multiplied, beautiful daughters were born to them, and certain beings from the heavens looked down and desired them. That single verse opens a door that religious institutions spent centuries trying to close. Most people assume that the daughters mentioned in the oldest biblical texts were simply background characters, passive figures in a story about fallen angels and giant offspring. But the ancient record paints a very different picture. These women were not bystanders. They were recipients of a knowledge transfer so powerful that it shaped the course of human history. In this story, we will move through 3 layers of discovery. First, we will trace the origins of this forbidden text and understand why it was removed from the biblical canon. Then, we will follow the daughters themselves, tracking how their inherited knowledge surfaced in 4 ancient civilizations separated by oceans and centuries. And finally, we will confront the question that the established church has never been comfortable answering. What happened to that knowledge and who still carries it today? And once we understand this first layer, the real story begins. There exists a text so old that scholars struggle to date it with certainty. The Book of Enoch, also known as First Enoch. For the first 300 years of Christianity, this text was read aloud in churches. Early church fathers quoted it. The Apostle Jude referenced it directly in the New Testament. Jude verse 14 says that Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied about certain things to come. That is a direct citation, a New Testament author pointing back to a book that the church would later reject. So what happened? Why would a text endorsed by Scripture itself be cast out of the canon? The answer lies in what the Book of Enoch reveals. It does not simply tell a story about rebellious angels. It names them, it describes their ranks, it details exactly what they taught humanity. And most importantly for our story tonight, it describes what happened to the women who received that teaching. The knowledge did not vanish when the floodwaters rose. It survived, it adapted, it spread. The early church councils faced a problem. The Book of Enoch gave too much detail. It explained the origin of certain practices that the church wanted to condemn without explaining. Astrology, metallurgy, herbalism, cosmetics, enchantments. According to 1 Enoch chapter 8, these were not human inventions. They were gifts, or perhaps curses, delivered directly from celestial beings to human women. The church could not allow that narrative to stand. If these arts came from heavenly beings, then condemning them became theologically complicated. It was simpler to remove the source. By the 4th century, the Book of Enoch had been stripped from the Western biblical canon. Copies were destroyed. Priests who still read it were warned. For over 1,000 years, the Western world forgot that this book existed. But here is the part that changes everything. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church never removed it. They kept it. They preserved it. They continued reading it as Holy Scripture. And when European explorers finally encountered Ethiopian manuscripts in the 18th century, the text resurfaced. Scholars translated it, and what they found inside shook the foundations of biblical scholarship. The Book of Enoch contains detailed accounts of 200 celestial beings called the Watchers. These beings made a pact on a mountaintop. They swore an oath together, and then they descended to earth and took wives from among the daughters of men. But the text does not stop there. It goes further than Genesis ever does. It names the leaders: Semyaza, Azazel, Barakiel, Kakabiel. Each one taught a different branch of forbidden knowledge, and each one chose specific women to receive those teachings. Subscribe for more biblical revelations that most people never hear about. This story is just getting started. What the Book of Enoch describes is not a simple myth. It is a detailed record of knowledge transfer, and the women at the center of that transfer became something new, something the ancient world had never seen before. They were human, yes, but they carried knowledge that was not human in origin, and that combination made them powerful, feared, hunted, and in many cases worshipped. The question we need to ask tonight is not whether this happened. The question is why the memory of these women appears in every major ancient civilization. Greece remembered them, Babylon remembered them, the Hebrew tradition remembered them, and medieval Europe remembered them so vividly that it burned thousands of women alive trying to erase the memory once and for all. But memory, like knowledge, has a way of surviving fire, and the daughters of the Nephilim left a trail that no Inquisition could fully destroy. Tonight we follow that trail, from the mountain top where the oath was sworn, through the flood that was supposed to wash it all away, and into the civilizations that rose from the mud carrying secrets that were never supposed to reach human hands. Chapter 2. The Watchers descend the mountaintop where it all began has a name. Mount Hermon. It sits on the border of modern-day Lebanon and Syria. Today, tourists visit it for skiing, but in the ancient world, this mountain carried a reputation so dark that even the bravest travelers avoided its summit after nightfall. First Enoch chapter 6 verse 6 describes the event in precise terms. 200 celestial beings gathered on the peak of Mount Hermon. They made a mutual oath. They bound themselves together with a curse, and then they descended. These beings were not what most people think of when they hear the word angel. The Book of Enoch calls them watchers. In the original language, the word is irin. It means those who are awake, those who observe. Their original purpose was exactly what their name suggests. They were stationed in the heavens to watch over humanity, to observe, to guard, but something changed. They looked down and saw the daughters of men, and desire replaced duty. Like if this truth amazed you. Most people have never heard the full story of the Watchers. The leader of this rebellion was Semjaza. He feared that the others might back out, leaving him to bear the punishment alone. So he proposed the oath. First Enoch chapter 6 records his words. He said to them, "I fear that perhaps you will not agree to do this deed, and I alone will suffer for this great sin." The others reassured him. They all swore together, 200 voices on a mountaintop, binding themselves to a decision that would reshape the world below. But Semjaza was not the only leader. The text names 20 chieftains, each commanding a group of 10. Azazel, Amoros, Barakiel, Kokabiel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Danel, Ezekiel, Sarakael, Azel. The names are preserved in the Ethiopian manuscripts with remarkable consistency, and each of these leaders carried a specific area of expertise, a specific branch of knowledge that they would eventually pass on to the women they chose. This is where the story takes a turn that most religious traditions prefer to ignore. The descent of the Watchers was not just an act of lust, it was an act of teaching. First Enoch chapter 8 lays it out in stunning detail. Azazel taught humans the art of metalworking. He showed them how to forge swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He revealed the secrets of extracting metals from the earth, but that was only the beginning. He also taught the use of antimony and the beautifying of eyelids and the knowledge of precious stones and dyes. In other words, Azazel taught both warfare and beauty, both destruction and adornment. The combination is not accidental. Semjaza taught enchantments and the cutting of roots. This is herbalism, medicine, but also something deeper. The word enchantments in the original text carries overtones of binding spells and incantations. Semjaza taught women how to use the natural world in ways that went beyond simple healing. Barakiel taught astrology, not the horoscope column version we see in newspapers today. True celestial observation, the mapping of star movements, the prediction of seasons, floods, droughts, and eclipses. This was power-level knowledge. The ability to read the sky gave its possessor the ability to predict the future. Kokabiel taught the knowledge of the constellations. Tamiel taught the signs of the sun. Azradel taught the course of the moon. Comment your interpretation below. What do you think it means that celestial beings taught specific women the secrets of the stars? Consider what this means. Before the Watchers descended, humanity lived in what the text describes as a state of relative simplicity. They farmed, they herded animals, they built basic shelters. The knowledge level was limited to what could be learned through observation and trial over generations. Then, In what appears to be a single generation, everything changed. Metallurgy appeared, astronomy appeared, pharmacology appeared, cosmetics appeared, weaponry appeared. The explosion of knowledge was sudden, total, and according to the Book of Enoch, not natural. Modern scholars who study ancient technology have long puzzled over what they call the knowledge gap. How did certain civilizations leap from basic stone tools to advanced metallurgy in what appears to be an impossibly short time? The mainstream explanation involves gradual discovery and trade, but the Book of Enoch offers a different answer. The knowledge was delivered, it was taught, and the students were not chosen at random. They were specific women, daughters of specific families, selected by beings who had watched humanity long enough to know exactly who would be the most effective recipients. The oath on Mount Hermon was not just a promise to descend, it was a promise to transfer, to take the knowledge of heaven and plant it in the minds of earth, and the soil in which they planted it was female. The daughters received the knowledge first. They were the primary students, and what they learned, they passed on, through their children, through their communities, through traditions that would survive even the greatest catastrophe the world had ever seen. But here is what the competitor story leaves out. The Watchers knew the consequences. The Book of Enoch makes it clear that these beings understood the punishment that awaited them. They descended anyway. The desire to teach was as strong as the desire to touch, and the women who received their teaching became carriers of something that was never meant for human minds. The weight of that knowledge would echo through millennia, and the next chapter reveals exactly what those women did with it. Chapter 3. The daughters who received the knowledge. There is a detail in 1st Enoch that most commentators skip over too quickly. When the Watchers descended, they did not simply appear among humanity at large, they chose. The text says they selected wives for themselves. The word selected matters. It implies discernment, evaluation, purpose. These celestial beings did not act on impulse alone. They identified specific women and approached them with intention. And what happened next was not just a physical union, it was an education. 1st Enoch chapter 7 verse 1 says that the Watchers took wives and began to go in unto them. But verse 2 continues with something that changes the entire meaning of the encounter. And they taught them charms and enchantments, and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. The teaching came alongside the union. It was inseparable from it. The relationship itself was the delivery mechanism for the knowledge. The intimacy was not the point. The transfer was now. Think about what this means for the daughters themselves. These were not passive vessels. To receive knowledge of metallurgy, one must have the capacity to understand metallurgy. To learn astrology, one must possess the intelligence to track celestial movements and calculate cycles. To master herbalism and enchantments, one must have both memory and intuition sharp enough to handle complex systems of natural law. The Watchers did not choose simple women. They chose brilliant ones. Share this with fellow believers who need to hear this forgotten chapter of history. This is one of the most overlooked aspects of the entire Enochian narrative. Mainstream commentary focuses on the Watchers, their sin, their punishment, their monstrous offspring, but the women themselves are treated as footnotes, background characters in someone else's story. The ancient text suggests the opposite. These women became the first generation of what we might call initiated humans, people who held knowledge beyond what the natural human experience could produce, and they did not waste it. The knowledge they received fell into several distinct categories. First, there was the knowledge of the earth itself, root cutting and plant identification. This was not simple gardening. The original term suggested deep pharmacological understanding, the ability to extract specific compounds from specific plants for specific effects. Healing, yes, but also alteration of consciousness, influence over the body and mind. This was power-level botanical knowledge that even modern science is still rediscovering in the study of plant alkaloids and psychoactive compounds. Second, there was the knowledge of the sky. Astrology in its original form was not fortune-telling. It was celestial mechanics. The daughters learned to track the movements of stars and planets with a precision that allowed them to predict natural events, floods, droughts, eclipses, seasonal changes. In an agricultural world, this knowledge was more valuable than gold. The woman who could tell you when to plant and when to harvest, when the river would rise and when it would fall, held the survival of an entire community in her hands. Third, there was the knowledge of metals and stones. Azazel specifically taught the extraction and working of metals, the creation of weapons and ornaments, but also the properties of precious stones and dyes. This was material science at a level that would take humanity thousands of years to replicate on its own. The daughters who learned this craft could forge tools, create jewelry, produce pigments, and work with metals in ways that gave them enormous economic and social leverage. Yet the truth hidden in Scripture goes deeper than most people realize. Fourth, and perhaps most controversial, there was the knowledge of enchantments. The Hebrew and Aramaic terms used in the Enochian text point towards something that modern language struggles to define. It was not magic in the fantasy sense. It was closer to what we might call applied metaphysics, the understanding of unseen forces and how to work with them. Incantations, binding words, practices that operated on a level between the physical and the spiritual. This was the knowledge that would later be called sorcery, witchcraft, and divination, and it was taught directly by beings who understood the spiritual realm because they came from it. The daughters who received all of this did not simply sit with the knowledge and wait. They used it. They became figures of authority within their communities. Women who could heal the sick, predict the weather, forge tools, and speak words that carried unusual weight. They were consulted. They were revered, and in many cases they were feared, because the people around them could see that these women operated on a different level. They knew things they should not have been able to know. They could do things that defied ordinary explanation. But here is the part that makes the story truly remarkable. These women had children. The union between the Watchers and the daughters produced offspring, and those offspring were not ordinary. Genesis chapter 6 verse 4 names them the Nephilim. They were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The daughters gave birth to giants, and those giants carried the blood of both worlds. Subscribe for more biblical revelations that change everything you thought you knew. The knowledge the daughters received did not stop with them. It flowed outward, through their children, through the communities they influenced, through the traditions and practices they established. And when the flood came, when the waters rose to destroy what the Nephilim had corrupted, the knowledge itself proved harder to drown than any living thing, because knowledge does not need a body to survive. It only needs a mind willing to carry it. And there were minds ready. More ready than anyone expected. But what happens to that knowledge when the world it belonged to gets washed away? The next chapter tells the story of the giants, the chaos they created, and the catastrophe that was supposed to end it all. Chapter 4: The Nephilim and the Age of Giants. The children born from the union of the Watchers and the daughters of men were unlike anything the world had seen. 1 Enoch chapter 7, verses 2 through 5 describes them in terms that are difficult to dismiss as metaphor. They grew to enormous size. They consumed the produce of all the people until the people could no longer feed them. And when food ran out, the Nephilim turned on humanity itself. They began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and then they devoured one another's flesh and drank the blood. The text is unflinching. The Nephilim were a catastrophe in physical form. But here is what most retellings get wrong. The Nephilim were not just large. They were intelligent. They carried the knowledge of their fathers and the biology of their mothers. They were hybrid beings who combined celestial capability with human ambition, and that combination proved devastating. The giants did not simply roam the earth causing random destruction. They built, they organized, they dominated. Ancient traditions from multiple cultures describe a pre-flood world ruled by beings of enormous stature and terrible power. The Book of Enoch gives us the origin story for those traditions. The chaos was not limited to physical violence. The forbidden knowledge that the Watchers had taught the daughters now spread through the Nephilim on a massive scale. Weapons that should not have existed for thousands of years were being forged. Astronomical observations that should have taken centuries of careful development were being used to consolidate power. Herbal compounds and enchantments that gave their users influence over others were becoming tools of control. The pre-flood world, according to Enoch, was a world where the boundaries between heaven and earth had been shattered. And the result was not paradise, it was horror. Like, if this truth shocked you, the Bible barely scratches the surface of what happened before the flood. Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 through 7 records God's response. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created. This is the theological reason for the flood. The corruption had become total. But the Book of Enoch adds a layer that Genesis leaves out. The corruption was not simply moral decline, it was genetic and intellectual contamination. The knowledge of heaven had been planted in earthly soil, and the fruit it produced was poison. The watchers themselves were punished before the flood arrived. 1 Enoch chapter 10 describes their fate in vivid terms. God sent his archangels to deal with the rebellious beings. Raphael was sent to bind Azazel, hand and foot, and cast him into darkness. Michael was sent to bind Semjazer and his associates. They were chained in valleys of the earth, imprisoned until the great day of judgment. Their freedom was taken. Their access to the world above was severed. But their knowledge remained loose on the earth. That is the critical detail. The beings were bound, but the information they released could not be recalled. Now the flood came. The waters rose. Genesis tells us that only Noah and his family survived on the ark, 8 people. The rest of humanity perished along with the Nephilim. The giants drowned. The corrupted world was washed clean. That is the story most of us grew up hearing. A fresh start, a clean slate. But the truth is more complicated than that. The Book of Enoch explains that the spirits of the Nephilim, being neither fully celestial nor fully human, were not destroyed by the flood. Their bodies died, but their spirits remained. 1 Enoch chapter 15 verse 8 says that the spirits of the giants afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, do battle, and work destruction on the earth. They became what later tradition would call unclean spirits or demons. The physical Nephilim were gone, but their spiritual residue persisted, and that residue carried with it the echo of the knowledge that created them. But what comes next will shock you. There is an even more important survival mechanism that the competitor story completely misses. The knowledge itself survived through human carriers. Noah's family included wives. The text does not elaborate on their backgrounds. Genesis is silent on who these women were before they boarded the ark. But ancient Jewish commentary, including passages from the Book of Jubilees, suggest that the pre-flood knowledge was not entirely erased. Some of it crossed the floodwaters, not through rebellion or disobedience, but because it had already been woven into the fabric of human understanding. You cannot unknow something once it is learned. The women who survived the flood may not have been daughters of the Nephilim themselves, but they lived in a world shaped by that knowledge. They carried traces of it. And when the waters receded and humanity began again, those traces began to grow. Comment your interpretation below. Do you think the forbidden knowledge truly survived the flood? This is the pivot point of the entire story. The flood was supposed to be a reset, a divine correction, and in many ways it was. But the knowledge that the Watchers delivered did not obey the same rules as flesh and blood. It could not be drowned, it could not be burned, it could not be buried deep enough. Because knowledge, once given, becomes part of the species that receives it. And from the mud of the post-flood world, as new civilizations began to rise, familiar patterns started to emerge. Women with unusual knowledge. Women who could read the stars, work with metals, heal with herbs, and speak words that carried power. The daughters of the Nephilim were gone, but their legacy was very much alive, and 4 great civilizations would prove it beyond any doubt. Chapter 5. Echoes in ancient Greece. When the Greeks told stories about powerful women with dangerous knowledge, they were not just spinning fantasies, they were remembering. and the memory they carried matches the Enochian account with a precision that is difficult to explain as coincidence. Greece gave us two figures in particular that bear the fingerprints of the Nephilim legacy: Medusa and the Sirens. Both of them carry characteristics that trace directly back to the daughters who received knowledge from the Watchers, and both of them were punished for what they knew. Start with Medusa. The version most people know is simple: a monster with snakes for hair who turned men to stone. But the oldest Greek sources tell a very different story. Before she was a monster, Medusa was a priestess, a beautiful woman who served in the temple of Athena. She was known for her intelligence, her beauty, and her connection to sacred knowledge. The Roman poet Ovid records that Poseidon, a god who came from the sea, desired her and took her in Athena's temple. The parallel to the Enochian account is striking. A celestial or divine being desires a human woman and crosses a boundary to be with her. The union violates sacred law, and the woman is transformed by the encounter. After the violation, Athena did not punish Poseidon. She punished Medusa. She turned her hair into serpents and gave her a gaze that could turn any living thing to stone. Think about what this really means. Medusa's power was in her eyes, in her ability to see, and anyone who returned her gaze was destroyed. This is a story about dangerous perception, about a woman who saw too much and whose very sight became lethal to those around her. The ancient Greeks were encoding something real. A woman who received knowledge from a being above her station and was transformed into something feared and eventually destroyed for it. Subscribe for more biblical revelations hidden in ancient mythology. Perseus, the hero who eventually killed Medusa, was himself the son of Zeus, a child of divine and human parentage. In other words, it took a Nephilim-type figure to defeat the legacy of the Watcher's transgression. The Greeks understood this pattern, even if they did not use the same vocabulary. Divine beings cross boundaries. Human women are changed by the encounter. The offspring become heroes or monsters, and the women themselves are either worshipped or destroyed. Now consider the Sirens. These figures appear in Homer's Odyssey and in countless other Greek texts. They are described as beings with irresistible voices who lured sailors to their deaths on rocky shores. But the oldest descriptions of the Sirens are not about seduction in the way we typically understand it. The Sirens' power was knowledge. They claimed to know everything that had happened on the earth. They promised wisdom to anyone who would listen, and men destroyed themselves trying to reach it. Yet the truth hidden in this myth goes deeper. Homer records the Siren song in the Odyssey, Book 12. They say, "Come closer, famous Odysseus. No one ever sailed past us without staying to hear the sweet sound of our voices. And whoever listens goes away a wiser man. We know all that the Greeks and Trojans suffered on the plains of Troy. We know everything that happens on this earth." The Sirens are not promising pleasure. They are promising total knowledge. Omniscience, the same kind of knowledge that the Watchers delivered on Mount Hermon. And the price for receiving it is death. The Greeks surrounded these female figures with specific imagery that connects directly to the Enochian pattern. Serpents, the ability to alter perception, irresistible voices, knowledge that destroys, transformation from human to something beyond human. Every one of these elements appears in the Book of Enoch's description of what happened when the Watchers taught the daughters of men. The Greeks were not inventing, they were translating, taking a memory that predated their civilization and expressing it through their own cultural language. There are other Greek figures who fit the same pattern. Circe, the sorceress who could transform men into animals using herbs and incantations. She lived on a remote island apart from normal human society and possessed knowledge that no ordinary woman should have had. Her pharmacological expertise mirrors exactly the root-cutting and plant knowledge that first Enoch attributes to the teachings of the Watchers. Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft, crossroads, and the night, was associated with forbidden knowledge, herbal magic, and power over spirits. The Greeks worshipped her at threshold spaces, the boundaries between one world and another. She was a boundary figure, exactly what the daughters of the Nephilim became after their encounter with beings from beyond the earthly realm. Share this with fellow believers who love discovering hidden connections in Scripture. The Greek evidence alone would be compelling, but Greece is only one of 4 witnesses. The next civilization that preserved the memory of the Nephilim's daughters sits thousands of miles to the east in the river valleys of Mesopotamia, and their version of the story is even older than the Greek one. The Babylonians did not just remember the daughters, they named them, they described their powers, and they connected them directly to beings who descended from the sky. The trail of the Watcher's knowledge was about to become impossible to deny. Chapter 6: The Shadow of Babylon and the Memory of Lilith. The Mesopotamian valley between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers is where written history began. The Sumerians carved their records into clay tablets over 5,000 years ago. And buried in those tablets is a figure so old that she predates the Hebrew Bible itself. Her name is Lilith, and her story connects the ancient Near East directly to the Nephilim narrative in ways that religious institutions have spent centuries trying to obscure. The earliest known reference to Lilith appears in the Sumerian poem called the Hulupu tree, dating to roughly 2100 BCE. In that text, a dark maiden dwells in the trunk of a sacred tree. She is described as a being who refuses to leave, a being who has made her home in a space between worlds. The tree itself is a boundary object, rooted in the earth but reaching toward the sky, and Lilith sits at the center of it, guarding knowledge that others seek. The Babylonians expanded the story. In their tradition, Lilith became associated with a class of female spirits called the Lilitu. These were night beings, entities connected to wind, storm, and the unseen world. They were feared for their ability to influence dreams, fertility, and the boundary between life and death. They were not human, but they were not fully divine either. They occupied a middle space, and that middle space is exactly where the daughters of the Nephilim stood after their encounter with the Watchers. But what comes next is where the story truly ignites. The Hebrew tradition took the Babylonian Lilith and placed her in the Garden of Eden itself. The Alphabet of Ben Sira, a medieval Jewish text, records a tradition that Lilith was Adam's first wife, created from the same earth as Adam, equal to him in origin, but Lilith refused to be subordinate. She demanded equality, and when it was denied, she spoke the ineffable name of God and flew away from the garden. She chose exile over submission. She chose forbidden knowledge over comfortable ignorance. Like if this truth amazed you, most people have never heard the full story of Lilith. This tradition places Lilith outside the garden before Eve was ever created. She is the woman who walked away from divine order by choice. And where did she go? According to the rabbinic texts, Lilith went to the shores of the Red Sea, where she consorted with fallen angels. The connection to the Watcher narrative is direct and unmistakable. Lilith, in the Hebrew tradition, is a woman who chose to align herself with rebellious celestial beings. She received their knowledge. She bore their children. She became something that was neither fully human nor fully spirit. She became a daughter of the Nephilim in the most literal sense. Isaiah chapter 34, verse 14 contains the only direct biblical reference to Lilith in the canonical Hebrew text. The passage describes a desolate landscape where wild creatures gather, and there, among the ruins, Lilith finds her resting place. The Hebrew word used is Lilith. Most English translations render it as screech owl or night creature, hiding the proper name behind a generic description. But the original text is specific. It uses a name, and that name connects to a tradition far older than the Book of Isaiah itself. The Babylonian connection goes beyond Lilith alone. The Sumerian pantheon includes the Anunnaki, beings who descended from the heavens to the earth. The parallels to the Watchers are extensive and well documented by scholars. The Anunnaki, like the Watchers, came from above. They interacted with human women. They established systems of knowledge that included astronomy, agriculture, metallurgy, and governance. And the women who served in their temples were regarded as keepers of sacred knowledge, priestesses who maintained the connection between the human world and the divine realm. The Babylonian priestess tradition is particularly revealing. In the temples of Inanna and Ishtar, women held positions of extraordinary power. They practiced divination. They read the stars. They prepared herbal compounds. They performed rituals that were believed to open channels between worlds. These were not marginal figures. They were central to Babylonian society. Kings consulted them before going to war. Farmers sought their guidance on planting. Families asked for their blessings on marriages and births. The knowledge they wielded was the same knowledge described in the Book of Enoch. Astrology, herbalism, enchantments, metallurgical arts. The connection is not subtle, it is exact. Subscribe for more revelations about the hidden history of the Bible. And there is one more layer that most people miss entirely. The Babylonians did not see this knowledge as evil. They saw it as sacred. The women who carried it were honored. The beings who delivered it were worshipped. This is the fundamental split between the Mesopotamian and Hebrew interpretations of the same event. The Hebrews looked at the Watcher narrative and saw transgression, corruption, and judgment. The Babylonians looked at it and saw revelation, wisdom, and power. Both traditions preserved the same memory, but they drew opposite moral conclusions from it. This split explains something crucial about the history of the Nephilim's daughters. In every culture that remembered them, the same question arose. Are these women blessed or cursed? Are they healers or destroyers? Wise women or witches? The answer depended entirely on who was asking. And in medieval Europe, the answer would come with fire, rope, and iron. The next chapter tells the story of what happened when the church decided, once and for all, that the knowledge of the daughters was the work of the devil, and the punishment it inflicted would become one of the darkest chapters in human history. Chapter 7: The Inquisition and the Witch Hunts. For over 1,000 years after the fall of Rome, the knowledge of the Nephilim's daughters moved through Europe in whispers. It lived in the hands of village healers. It survived in the oral traditions of women who could read the weather by watching the sky, cure fevers with specific plants, and ease childbirth with techniques passed down through generations of mothers and grandmothers. These women were not reading the Book of Enoch. Most of them had never heard of it, but they were practicing the same arts that the Enochian text describes: herbalism, astrology, the manipulation of unseen forces through spoken words. The knowledge had changed form. It had been simplified, localized, and stripped of its celestial context. But it was still recognizable, and the Church recognized it. In 1484, Pope Innocent VIII issued a papal bull called Summus Desiderantes Effectibus. It authorized the persecution of witches throughout the Holy Roman Empire. 2 years later, 2 Dominican friars named Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger published the Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. This book became the operational manual for the Inquisition's campaign against women accused of practicing the old knowledge. And within its pages, the connection to the Nephilim narrative is made explicit. The Malleus Maleficarum directly cites the story of the sons of God taking the daughters of men. It quotes Genesis chapter 6. It references the tradition of fallen angels teaching forbidden arts to human women, and then it declares that any woman who practices those arts in the present day is guilty of the same sin. Comment your interpretation below. Do you think the church knew exactly what knowledge it was trying to destroy? Think about the scale of what happened next. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, an estimated 40,000 to 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft across Europe. Some historians place the number higher. The vast majority of the accused were women, and the charges against them read like a catalogue of the Watcher's teachings. They were accused of using herbs to heal or harm. They were accused of reading the stars and predicting the future. They were accused of speaking incantations that could influence the minds and bodies of others. They were accused of consorting with spirits and demons. They were accused of possessing knowledge that no ordinary woman should have. The Inquisition was not just a religious persecution. It was a knowledge purge. The Church was systematically identifying and eliminating women who carried the remnants of a tradition that stretched back thousands of years. The village healer who knew which plant could reduce a fever. The midwife who understood the cycles of the moon and their connection to childbirth. The elderly woman who could predict storms by reading the behavior of animals and the patterns of clouds. These women were not witches in any supernatural sense. They were the end of a very long chain, the last visible link connecting medieval Europe to the knowledge that the Watchers delivered on Mount Hermon. Yet the truth hidden in this history goes deeper than persecution. The methods used to extract confessions during the witch trials reveal what the inquisitors were actually looking for. Under torture, accused women were asked specific questions. Where did you learn your arts? Who taught you? Did you make a pact with a spirit? Did you receive knowledge from a being that appeared to you? The inquisitors were not asking random questions. They were searching for the transmission chain. They wanted to know how the knowledge had been passed down. They were trying to map the lineage. Mother to daughter, teacher to student, generation to generation, back to the original source. The Malleus Maleficarum contains passages that describe female witches gathering in secret meetings where knowledge is shared and rituals are performed. These gatherings, called sabbats, were described as meetings where forbidden knowledge was exchanged, where the boundary between the human world and the spirit world was thin, and where women held authority. Whether these sabbats actually occurred as described is debatable, but the inquisitors believed they did, and the description they gave matches the pattern we have traced from the beginning. Women gathering to practice arts that involve herbal knowledge, celestial observation, spoken incantations, and contact with the unseen realm. Share this with fellow believers. The history of the witch hunts hides a deeper truth. The geography of the witch trials is also revealing. The most intense persecutions occurred in regions where pre-Christian folk traditions were strongest. The Alpine regions, the Basque Country, rural Germany, Scandinavia, Scotland. These were areas where Christianization came late and where older traditions survived longest. The women in these regions were not practicing Satanism. They were practicing traditions that had been passed down orally for centuries, possibly millennia. Traditions that involved knowledge of plants, stars, and the hidden properties of the natural world. The same knowledge described in 1st Enoch. The church eventually ended the witch trials. By the 18th century, Enlightenment rationalism had made the prosecution of witchcraft politically and intellectually untenable. The fires went out, the gallows came down, but the knowledge did not die with the accused. It had already gone underground. It had been absorbed into folk medicine, into astrology, into herbal traditions that continued in rural communities across Europe. It survived in the work of women who called themselves healers instead of witches, who framed their knowledge in terms of tradition instead of supernatural power. The Inquisition had tried to burn the knowledge out of Europe, but like the flood before it, the purge failed. The knowledge adapted, it changed its name, and it continued. But the final chapter asks the question that matters most. If this knowledge has survived every attempt to destroy it, with a flood to the fire, then where is it now? Who carries it today? And what does it mean for us in the modern world? The answer might be closer than you think. Chapter 8. The Knowledge That Refuses to Die. We have followed this story from the summit of Mount Hermon to the burning pyres of medieval Europe. We have traced the knowledge of the Watchers through the daughters who received it, through the flood that failed to erase it, through the civilizations that preserved it, and through the Inquisition that tried to destroy it once and for all. And now we arrive at the question that has been building beneath every chapter. What happened to the knowledge? Did it finally disappear? Or is it still here, hiding in plain sight? The answer begins with a fact that most people overlook. Every major branch of modern science has roots in the same categories of knowledge that the Book of Enoch attributes to the Watchers. Metallurgy became chemistry, astrology became astronomy, herbalism became pharmacology. The knowledge of enchantments fed into psychology and the study of consciousness. The forbidden arts did not die. They were rebranded. They were moved from the hands of individual women into the lecture halls of universities and the laboratories of corporations. Subscribe for more biblical revelations that challenge how you see the world. Consider the history of medicine alone. For centuries, the healing knowledge of women was dismissed as superstition. The same knowledge that the Inquisition persecuted was mocked by the Enlightenment and ignored by modern science. But in the last 50 years, pharmaceutical companies have spent billions studying the very plants that folk healers used for centuries. Compounds from willow bark became aspirin. Compounds from the foxglove plant became digitalis, a critical heart medication. Compounds from the Pacific yew tree became Taxol, a cancer treatment. The knowledge of roots and plants that first Enoch says the Watchers taught to the daughters of men is now the foundation of a global industry worth trillions. The women who carried that knowledge were burned. The companies that profit from it are celebrated. The same pattern holds for astronomy. The celestial knowledge that Barachiel and Tokabael taught was preserved across millennia. It moved through Babylonian astrology, Greek mathematics, Islamic astronomy, and into the scientific revolution that gave us Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler. The trajectory is unbroken. The ability to read the sky and predict what comes next now powers satellite systems, weather forecasting, and space exploration. Different hands hold it, but the origin remains. Like if this realization changed how you see history, there is a deeper pattern connecting everything we have discussed tonight. Every civilization that encountered the legacy of the Nephilim's daughters faced the same choice: embrace the knowledge or destroy the carriers. Babylon embraced it. Greece mythologized it. The Hebrew tradition warned against it. Medieval Europe tried to burn it out, and modern civilization has done something entirely new. It has separated the knowledge from its story. It has taken the practical applications and discarded the origin narrative. We use the medicine but forget the healers. We use the astronomy but forget the stargazers. The Book of Enoch ends with a vision of judgment. The Watchers are condemned. The Nephilim are destroyed. The earth is cleansed, but the knowledge is never explicitly recalled. The weapons remain forged. The stars remain mapped. The plants remain known. Even in the divine narrative, the knowledge persists. Once released, it cannot be contained. Not by flood, not by fire, not by decree. Comment your interpretation below. Do you think the knowledge of the Watchers still shapes our world today? And here is the final thread. The women who first received this knowledge were not random. They were chosen. Intelligence, capacity, willingness to learn. And in every culture we examined, the pattern repeated. Specific women, often at the margins of society, preserved and transmitted knowledge that the dominant culture tried to suppress. Medusa was a priestess before she was a monster. The sirens were keepers of total knowledge before they were reduced to seducers. Lilith was a figure of equanimity before she was demonized. The village healers were caregivers before they were called witches. The recurring pattern is about the relationship between knowledge and authority. Whoever holds knowledge holds power. And when that knowledge sits in the hands of people outside the established power structure, especially women, the response is predictable. The knowledge is appropriated. The carriers are demonized. The origin story is erased. This has happened in every civilization we examined tonight. Share this with everyone you know. This story deserves to be heard. Tonight we have done something the established narrative does not encourage. We have followed the daughters instead of the fathers. We have traced the knowledge instead of the punishment. We have asked where the information went instead of only asking where it came from. And the trail has led us from an ancient mountaintop to the laboratories and observatories of the modern world. The knowledge that was never supposed to reach human hands now powers the very civilization we live in. The daughters of the Nephilim are gone. But what they carried, what they protected, what they passed on through millennia of persecution and erasure is everywhere. It is in the medicine you take. It is in the technology that lets you watch this story unfold. It is in the maps of the stars that guide ships and satellites across the darkness. The forbidden knowledge was never truly forbidden. It was just too powerful to be allowed its true name. And now you know that name. And now you know where it came from. And now the question belongs to you. What will you do with it?